8 Americans died in an Iranian desert in 1980. Not in combat, not in a firefight with Iranian forces. In a catastrophic, humiliating, self-inflicted disaster on a salt flat in the middle of nowhere. While the watching world, including America's enemies and its allies, concluded the same thing simultaneously. The United States military did not know how to conduct a complex special operations mission. Its branches could not talk to each other. Its helicopters crashed into its own transport planes. Its most elite unit, barely 5 months old and untested in any real-world mission, stood in the desert watching 8 of its people burn, while classified documents containing the names of CIA assets were left behind for Iranian intelligence to find at sunrise. That night was the worst in modern American military history. It was also the most important. Because everything that came after, the unit that killed Osama bin Laden, the team that pulled Saddam Hussein out of a hole in the ground, the operators who flew into Venezuela at 2 in the morning and kidnapped the sitting president from his own bedroom, all of it exists because of what failed in that desert. Iran handed America the humiliation that forced it to build the most lethal special operations force in human history, and Iran is about to face what that force has become. To understand what America is bringing to this conflict, you have to understand where it came from. Go back to 1979. The Shah of Iran, America's closest partner in the Middle East for 30 years, is overthrown by a religious revolution led by Ayatollah Khomeini. The Shah, dying of cancer, requests entry to the United States for medical treatment. President Carter, honoring a 30-year alliance, allows it. 13 days later, approximately 3,000 Iranian students storm the United States Embassy in Tehran. They overwhelm the Marine Guards who hold their fire because embassy security protocols prohibit lethal force unless lives are in immediate danger, specifically to prevent a diplomatic incident from becoming a war. 66 American citizens are taken hostage. The original plan, the students later admitted, was a symbolic 48-hour sit-in. Hand over the Shah and everyone goes home. Carter refused. The Shah was a dying man. Handing him over was a death sentence and a betrayal. Iran escalated its demands. The crisis that was supposed to last 72 hours became a 444-day national humiliation broadcast every night on every television screen in America. ABC created a nightly program called America Held Hostage that counted the days. That program eventually became Nightline and ran for 25 years. That is how large the story was. After 5 months of failed diplomacy, Carter walked into a room with his military advisors and said the words that set everything in motion. "All right, let's go get them." But here's what he did not understand in that room. America in 1980 had no idea how to do this. The United States military operated as 4 completely separate branches: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. They used different radios that operated on incompatible frequencies with incompatible encryption systems. They had different chains of command, different operational doctrines, and different definitions of basic tactical terminology. They had different abort criteria for the same scenarios. They trained separately. They planned separately. They actively, openly treated each other as rivals competing for the same Pentagon budget, rather than as components of a unified fighting force. There was no Joint Special Operations Command. There was no agreed-upon doctrine for how the 4 branches were supposed to function together on a single mission. The Air Force was quietly trying to offload its special operations aircraft entirely because it did not consider them worth the budget line. The Navy considered Marines to be glorified ship security. The Army considered everyone else irrelevant. The mission Carter just approved was going to require all 4 branches working in perfect coordination, plus the CIA, plus a brand new unit called Delta Force that had been operational for exactly 5 months. Delta Force was the creation of one man, Colonel Charles Beckwith, a Vietnam veteran who had spent a year embedded with Britain's SAS and returned convinced that America needed its own version. A small, hand-picked, surgically precise counterterrorism unit capable of deploying anywhere on Earth on minimal notice. For over a decade, the Pentagon said no. Senior officers considered the SAS model a foreign gimmick. Conventional Rangers and Green Berets could handle whatever came up. Beckwith kept fighting. Papers, briefings, congressional testimony. Finally, in November 1977, he received approval to stand up the first Special Forces operational detachment, Delta Force. Delta Force had been fully operational for 5 months when Carter came looking for them. These men had never run a real-world operation, and their first one, in front of the entire watching world, was going to be the most complex hostage rescue in modern military history. The plan that emerged from weeks of rushed planning under the worst possible intelligence conditions was called Operation Eagle Claw. It required 8 RH-53D Stallion helicopters to launch from the USS Nimitz in the Arabian Sea, fly 600 miles at low altitude into Iran, and land at a remote salt flat sea named Desert 1. 6 C-130 transport aircraft would arrive from Asira Island carrying Delta operators, Rangers, fuel, and equipment. The helicopters would refuel, load the assault teams, and fly another 50 miles to a mountain hideout where everyone would wait out the following day in concealment. On night 2, CIA assets already inside
Tehran would drive trucks to the hideout, transport the operators into the city, and at midnight, Delta would simultaneously hit the embassy, and all 6 buildings where hostages might be held. AC-130 gunships would orbit overhead. Army Rangers would seize a nearby airfield. Helicopters would extract hostages to the captured airfield. C-141 Starlifters would fly everyone home. They needed at least 6 functional helicopters to execute the mission. Fewer than 6, automatic abort. That threshold would become the most important number in American military history. On April 24, 1980, the operation began. Almost immediately, one helicopter developed a cracked rotor blade warning and had to be abandoned in the desert. 7 remaining. Then all 7 flew directly into a habu, an Arabic word for a wall of sand the size of a city, not a dust cloud, a 1,000-foot tall, 50 miles wide rolling mass of fine particulate matter that eliminates visibility, clogs avionics cooling vents, separates aircraft flying in formation, and turns instrument panels into malfunctioning guesswork. The pilots had been briefed on possible dust. Nobody briefed them on a biblical sandstorm. One helicopter, convinced its instruments were failing because the habu was destroying its cooling systems, turned around and flew all the way back to the Nimitz. 6 helicopters limped into Desert 1 90 minutes behind schedule. The C-130s were already there. Refueling began. For one moment, it looked salvageable. Then the 6th surviving helicopter developed a hydraulic failure in its second-stage flight control system that could not be repaired in the field. 5 helicopters, 1 below the minimum threshold. Mission abort. This should have been the worst part of the night. It was not, because whoever planned the operation somehow failed to account for the fact that Desert 1 was sitting next to a public road. A civilian Iranian bus with 45 passengers came down that road and immediately encountered C-130s and helicopters sitting in the open. Rangers stopped it. Then a fuel tanker came. The driver, running a black market gasoline operation in post-revolution Iran where fuel was strictly rationed, hit the gas and tried to blow through the roadblock. A Delta intelligence officer ordered his man to take it out with an anti-tank weapon. The light anti-tank rocket hit the tanker center mass. The truck exploded in a fireball visible for miles. The driver survived by jumping out before the explosion, fled in a following pickup truck, and disappeared into the desert darkness. Now America had a dead Iranian civilian, 2 escaped eyewitnesses heading toward civilization, 45 bus passengers detained in a C-130 cargo bay, a salt flat lit up like a bonfire, and an abort order from Washington telling everyone to pack up and get out before the Iranian military arrived. During the extraction, Marine Major Jim Schaefer needed to hover taxi his helicopter Bluebeard 3 out of the path of a C-130 parked behind it. The rotor wash from lifting into the hover created a brownout, a swirling dust cloud so dense that Schaefer could see nothing outside the cockpit. His only visual reference was an Air Force controller standing in front of the helicopter signaling directions. The rotor wash blasted the controller backward. Schaefer interpreted the controller appearing to move away as his helicopter drifting backward. He applied forward stick to compensate. The controller kept staggering back into the wind. Schaefer kept correcting forward. Bluebeard 3's main rotor blade clipped the vertical stabilizer of the C-130 behind it. The helicopter pitched forward and crashed into the C-130's wing. That aircraft was carrying collapsible rubber fuel bladders holding thousands of gallons of helicopter fuel on top of its own full internal tanks. Both aircraft became a single fireball instantly. 5 Air Force airmen and 3 Marines were killed. The explosion rocked the other aircraft parked nearby. Then the ordnance inside the burning C-130 began cooking off. Anti-aircraft missiles, grenades, rockets, thousands of rounds of small arms ammunition detonating in every direction. Tracer rounds shooting out of the fireball. A red-eye missile launching itself out of the burning fuselage and disappearing into the dark desert. Everyone still standing ran for the surviving C-130s. They left behind 5 fully intact helicopters, 8 dead Americans who could not be recovered from the flames, classified mission documents, photographs of the embassy compound, and the names of CIA assets operating undercover inside Tehran. Carter went on television the next morning and told America everything. The hostages were scattered across the country within hours, dispersed into groups small enough that any future rescue attempt became mathematically impossible. The classified documents recovered from the abandoned helicopters were exploited by Iranian intelligence for years. The CIA asset names were eventually published, ending careers and endangering lives. Khomeini gave a speech declaring that God himself had sent angels in the form of the sandstorm to protect Iran from the Great Satan. The Soviet Union spent weeks rubbing it in on every diplomatic channel available. America's enemies looked at what happened in that desert and concluded that the world's largest military power did not know how to conduct a complex special operation. They were right, and that was the last time they would ever be right about it. The Pentagon commissioned an investigation under retired Admiral James Holloway III, a man with 30 years of combat experience, no political career left to protect, and no service loyalty left to defend. 4 months later, the Holloway report identified 23 specific issues, 11 of which were flagged as major contributors to the mission's failure. The incompatible radios, the separate chains of command, the different abort criteria, the marine helicopter plats borrowed from fleet mine countermeasure squadrons with no experience in long-range, low-altitude desert flying, the ad hoc joint task force assembled from scratch with no institutional memory, no permanent staff, and no mandate that would survive past the operation itself. Holloway's conclusion was unsparing. The enemy did not beat America in that desert. America beat itself. What followed was the most consequential restructuring of American military capability in the 20th century. December 1980, the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, was established at Fort Bragg. Every Tier 1 Special Operations unit in every service would train together, live together, and function as a single integrated force when deployed. November 1980, a SEAL officer named Richard Marino was tasked with building a dedicated maritime counterterrorism unit from scratch. He named it SEAL Team 6. Even though only 2 SEAL teams existed at the time, the name was deliberate deception, designed to make Soviet intelligence believe America had 3 additional SEAL teams they had not located. SEAL Team 6 was placed under JSOC. 3 decades later, there was the unit that put 2 rounds into Osama bin Laden's head. October 1981, the Army activated the 160th Aviation Battalion at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the Night Stalkers, created for one reason. Desert 1 proved that special operations could not keep borrowing fleet pilots trained for different missions. They needed pilots who flew nothing else, trained for nothing else, and answered only to the special operations community. The 160th standard for hitting a target insertion point is plus or minus 30 seconds, not minutes, seconds. October 1986, Congress passed the Goldwater-Nichols Act, the single most important piece of military legislation in modern American history. It rewired the entire Department of Defense from the ground up. It forced the force services to operate jointly by law. It created a single clean chain of command from the president to the ground operator. It ended by force of law the force services as rival companies model that had killed 8 men in the Iranian desert. 1987, the Nunn-Cohn Amendment created United States Special Operations Command, SOCOM, a 4-star unified command at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, that owned every Tier 1 Special Operations unit in every service. Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the 75th Rangers, Green Berets, Air Force Special Tactics, the 160th, SORE, all under one roof, one budget, one command. Then the machine went to work. October 2001, Afghanistan. 12-man Green Beret teams from the 5th Special Forces Group rode into combat on Afghan horses borrowed from local warlords because the terrain was too rough for vehicles. They called B-52 strikes from horseback using satellite communications. They toppled the Taliban government in approximately 2 months with a total ground force of 4 to 5